Good morning. So the more scientific advice meetings I had with the companies, the more it made me realize that it probably doesn't always feel good to be on the other side of the table. And manufacturers are facing a very challenging problem. There are a lot of regulatory requirements, but at the same time, there is a big world out there with very different healthcare systems that don't follow NICE guidance, that have different currencies, and they have different ability to care for their people. And HTA agencies require different information from manufacturers. But it looks like that HTA is here to stay and grow. So the good news is that HTA is easy. You're already doing what we want you to do, and you just need to do it a little bit better. And we need to make sure we help you in this process. And because HTA is easy, it doesn't mean it can do away with rigor, diligence, and effective planning. As part of the HTA process, what we need to figure out is how well your technology performs in the orange boxes. So how well does it work in clinical practice? And is your product worth being reimbursed? What you need to demonstrate to the payer is the value of your product. You need to show how much better it is compared to what the patients are getting now. You need to show that the price for your product is justifiable. And you need to make sure that the evidence you present is robust and it's of good quality. And the value proposition for your product must match the trial program. The HTA requirements are not that different from regulatory requirements, and they can be addressed in the common clinical development program. But it's important to start thinking about these requirements early on, pretty much as soon as you know that your healthy volunteers made it through phase 1. And this planning and this incorporation into clinical program development will help reach the reimbursement decision much sooner and much closer to the marketing authorization of the product. It depends on the market, but usually to get a reimbursement decision, you need 3 sets of parameters. So you need clinical data, you need additional data for your economic model, which would be costs, resources, epidemiological data. You need qualitative parameters, legal and ethical aspects of the technology, patients' experiences and preferences. And the data that you bring to the table needs to be of good quality, it needs to be systematically reviewed, and the assumptions you make for your economic case need to be justifiable. And the whole process needs to be as transparent as possible to make your case. Let's take a closer look at the clinical development program from the HTA perspective. So when we talk about population, it's important to find out who are these patients that are being treated in different healthcare systems that you're looking at. As Richard mentioned earlier today, US companies already talking to clinicians, and you've been doing it for decades, so keep up the good practice and find out whether your population in your trial is representative of those patient groups in different countries. You need to start thinking about subgroups early on in the process and identify biologically plausible subgroups before you embark on the big trial, rather than try to figure out any subgroups with the help of your statistician when you have all the data on the table. Comparators. David set out the key themes for comparators early in his talk. And comparators are the cornerstone of controversy between regulators and HTA agencies and among the HTA agencies themselves. And it's a real headache for the manufacturers. So to establish the comparators, you need to figure out what is the current treatment in the markets where you're coming to. And once again, you need to talk to the clinicians. And you might find out that there could be more than one relevant comparator. You need to explore the issues around the off-license use of the product and whether this is permitted in the country where you're bringing your product to. Single-arm trials make it very difficult for you to demonstrate value to the payer. Placebo-controlled trials might not be ideal either. We're very much supportive and interested in active comparator trials, and we think there should be wider support for active comparator trials across the board. However, we do understand that there are restrictions for this. Sometimes these are not possible. Sometimes it's not pragmatic to conduct such a active comparator trial. Sometimes we understand the requirements that you are facing from the regulator, and we need to know these issues because we are prepared to work with you. We are prepared to take all these requirements on board and to advise you on the best use of evidence to try to support the case for HTA to help you develop indirect treatment comparison and mixed treatment comparisons. When it comes to endpoints, the same story. If you have very early endpoints in your trial, they will make it difficult to demonstrate value for your product. From the HTA perspective, we're interested in health benefits and adverse events that are important to patients, that impact on quality of life and on duration of life. And if you are using surrogate outcomes in your trials, for HTA purposes, it's very important to prove the surrogate to final relationship. Quality of life data, very important. It should be collected in the trial with the aim to get utility values for those countries that would need them. And quality of life data in the trial should be collected for important events. Frequency of this data collection is also very, very important because it will help to identify relevant utilities for the health states in the economic model. HTA usually prefers generic measures for quality of life, but disease-specific measures can also be used. Regardless of the tools that are used, the key aim of quality of life data collection is to derive utility values for the economic model. And speaking of the economic models, the good news is that not all countries require them, but the bad news is that NICE definitely does. So it would be hard to get away without thinking about economic modeling. And once again, this dialogue with economists needs to start early on in the process, so the relevant data for the economic model is generated and collected in the trial. At the same time, economists will get a chance to realize what data they will not be getting from the trial, and early on start thinking of other sources of data that they will require, and perhaps thinking about additional studies that they need to design, additional observational studies they may need to get that data for their economic modeling purposes. There are a lot of points that could be raised in terms of requirements for economic modeling, but as clinical development program is concerned, you need to get the big cost drivers from your trial. You need to get the costs of dosing and administration. You need to get costs and utilities associated with discontinuation. The cost of your product, the price of your product, matters to you as the manufacturer. What matters to the payer is the cost of treatment of the patient for the entire care pathway using your product. And it's the perspective of the decision maker which will determine the costs and resources that are relevant for the country where you're going to. And for each country, for each state, you would need to collect country-specific data. The best requirement that HTA has is that we want to know the impossible. We want to know what happens in the future. And usually, this is many years after your trial ends. And to fulfill this requirement, you need to collect other sources of data. You need to try to follow up your patients as far into the future as you can. And you need to use some sophisticated modeling techniques to make your case. And then in the end, when you think that it's all done and you've got all your HTA requirements and you built your economic model, you might have to do it again and again and again for each claim that you're making, you need to provide separate evidence for your reimbursement case. It may seem to you that some HTA requirements might be tough or unfair or excessive, but the reality is that we want you to succeed, and very much so. The industry develops a lot of invaluable products that change people's lives, and this is our job to help you to bring these products to patients. And early scientific advice can help manage expectations. But what's important is our collaboration with our regulatory colleagues and our colleagues from the HTA agencies to make this process simpler for you and to help you design common clinical development program, which would help minimize this gap between the marketing authorization and the reimbursement decision. Thank you.